All right, let's continue with this online workshop from the Rock Church in San Diego. I'm Jerry Langford. Our next session will include Mike Diggs, the Safety and Security Director of Safety here at the Rock Church. A great guy, and of course, the coordinator, organizer of many of our conferences here at the Rock Church. And he'll be visiting with Chief David Nisleit, of course, the Chief of Police here in San Diego. I'm sure they're going to be having a fascinating discussion about community partnerships. And you're going to see ways that you can benefit in your own local community. So let's check out Mike Diggs and Chief David Nisleit.
Hi, I'm Mike Diggs. I work here at the Rock Church, and thanks for attending the workshop today. Today we're here with Chief David Nisleit, San Diego Police Department. And we're going to be talking today about building relationships and how to partner with different agencies in your area to just come alongside the police department. And some things that we discussed today hopefully will be helpful to churches all across the nation, Chief. So I think it's important to the conversation to help bring some context. So some of what we cover, we'll discuss that. So if you could just start by maybe sharing some effective ways that houses of worship can do to come alongside or walk with their local house of worship.
Yeah, absolutely. And for introductions, Chief David Nisleit, San Diego Police Department. Been in the profession for 32 years. So, really how you look at partnerships and working with law enforcement is obviously we're part of the community. And so when we look at our faith-based partners, is really right now is a difficult time for everyone going through COVID, going through everything else. A lot of people have lost their jobs and different things, and so there's a lot of anxiety out in the communities right now that we're seeing. We see a lot of panic from folks, and so really it's just about being a resource and having that voice of calm and reassuring people that we'll get through this, and it's about teamwork, and it's about just working alongside us hand by hand, but also being a support for us because, law enforcement's not unique. We also are feeling the effects, our families are feeling the effects of COVID in these unique times. And so it's kind of twofold, really. It's helping us, allow us to maintain our ability to go out and serve the communities that we need to serve, but also being that calming voice, reassuring people that we'll get through this.
Okay, great. And Chief, can you think of any action steps they could actually take to move in that direction?
I think, meetings, I know it's difficult right now to not being able to meet in person, much like, we can't attend church in person right now, but there's all this different technology, the Zoom meetings and the Microsoft Teams and different things like that. It's just having that ability to connect and work through things and have conversations and acknowledging everybody. That's really the way that the action items are, is kind of being that voice for the public and make certain it gets to law enforcement, and then being that voice to push that information back out. Because there's so much information, there's so much stuff changing with COVID, what's open, what's not open, what's allowable, what's not allowable. Even for someone who sits in a meeting every single day about COVID, it's constantly changing. So it's just that voice to push that information out.
Great. And maybe if you could share a little bit about, since COVID-19 really took a hold on us all, was there any noted shift in crime?
Yeah, that was something I was looking at daily. So a couple of things I would look at daily is the type of calls that we're getting, the type of crime cases that we're taking, and then actual call volume, and comparing it to the same day the previous year. So I'm very happy to report we're one of few jurisdictions that really did not see an increase in crime. We relatively saw, like domestic violence, some of our felony assaults, our child abuse cases relatively stay flat. And when I mean that, you would see them go slightly up. The next week they'd be slightly down. But if you were to draw a straight line across, relatively flat. But there's still concerns there. Is the ability to people to report. For instance, child abuse. Normally, a lot of the ways we get those types of calls is through our schools, through school counselors and medical staff and stuff like that. And so with everything being closed, obviously school's not in session, very difficult to get an in-person visit to a doctor. So those abilities to report those crimes have also been dropped. So, doing public service announcements to make certain that people of, domestic violence crime, child abuse crimes, still had an avenue, still knew that we were here, and really stressing that we're open, full service to handle anything that might come our way.
Again, I'd like to maybe revisit that domestic violence and child abuse a little later.
Sure, absolutely.
But for now, did you find you had to take any drastic steps during the shelter-in-place order to maintain the safety of the public, maybe in a different way, as well as the safety of your officers?
Yeah, so I'll answer. That's a great question. So 2 parts. I'll answer it first internally, measures that we had to put in place because obviously our officers are responding out and addressing folks that are showing symptoms or are testing positive for COVID. So we had to put different protocols in place, when to wear a mask, when to wear the N95 mask, when to wear a regular facial covering. We had to pretty much staff what I would call our medical assistance unit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to include hotlines that would go directly to another doctor to get people tested. So to date, we've had 13 officers test positive for COVID. 11 of those 13 are back to work. I have 2 that are still feeling the effects very much so of COVID. So we really had to put a lot of parameters into, cleaning workstations, really sanitizing vehicles after they've been used. Some agencies went away from having 2 officers in a car. We didn't necessarily do that because most of the calls that officers go to require 2 officers. So we took a look at that and made certain, and that's why we put the directive out that if you're in a car with more than yourself, you have to wear a mask. And then eventually it became, no matter what, if you're in a marked unit in uniform, you're going to be wearing a facial covering during your shift. So those are what we did in-house. And then also for the public is a lot more questions were asked. If you called for a call for service, a lot of questions were asked about travel, if you're showing any symptoms of being sick, all those different things. And that's really to make certain that, one, we're keeping ourselves healthy, but keeping the public healthy, but also maybe directing medical aid for those that might be actually symptomatic and have COVID.
That's interesting. I did the job for about 20 years,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine working during these times. But what I would like to say is, or ask you is, do you think your guys have, sometimes wearing all that gear sometimes, and the long sleeves and when it's hot out,
Right.
it can be a little cumbersome and uncomfortable. But do you find your guys are not happy about wearing it for the whole shift, wearing a facial covering, even though I know it's gear to keep them safe? And with that, a lot of what they do is proactive. So could you speak to that a little bit? Maybe they have to become more reactive in some areas.
Yeah, so, looking at the facial covering, obviously that's a total deviation from normal practice for us. We initially tried to say that you must wear a facial covering when you were contacting somebody that showed symptoms of COVID, but much to what you just said, Mike, is a lot of the stuff for officers is reactive. And so you make a traffic stop or you get flagged down on something, all of a sudden you're stopping, you're jumping out of your vehicle, and you're forgetting your facial covering because it's not second nature to us. And so that was the directive is, we were getting complaints that our officers weren't wearing facial coverings when they should be, even though at that time it had been not a mandate by the county, but it was still a recommendation by the county. So that was why the switch is officers were quickly jumping out of cars to address different things and leaving their mask behind. And so that was the change.
Also, I have to wonder, is there speaking about a shift in crime, I can remember Halloween being my least favorite day of all time to work because everyone had their faces covered and a lot of crime actually went up. So I'm wondering if you experienced any trend like that, and I want to get back to talking about some community-related stuff.
That was a concern of us. Obviously, with facial coverings, it's hard to identify folks. We really have not, again, and it's credit to the citizens of the city, we really have not seen a real increase during COVID of any type of crime. Occasionally we had more street robberies, and it makes it more difficult for victims to kind of identify or describe their assailant, but it's still been something that we've been able to work through. I know there was a lot of concern from the public that they would be stopped by law enforcement because they're wearing a facial covering. Especially in the minority community, had some concerns about that. So we had to do a lot of public education that, no, one, we're not going to stop you because you are wearing a facial covering. In fact, for the longest time, it was a recommendation, and then later into this COVID-19, it became a county-wide mandate. So just, again, a lot of public education, community education on the reasoning behind wearing facial coverings and the fact that you weren't going to be contacted by law enforcement because you were wearing one. You might be contacted if you're not wearing one, but not if you were.
Okay. Chief, thinking about the community, sometimes it's people apprehensive to in these times to approach the police and try to develop a relationship with them. So would you see there being any challenges in that effort if a house of worship wanted to initiate contact with your department? Do you see any challenges with that, and how would you speak to having people be more comfortable with approaching and trying to walk alongside of the police to help during these times?
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique time. I think that relationship with our faith-based group, with the churches, with the public is probably needed more now than ever. Yes, COVID makes it a little bit more difficult. People don't feel comfortable walking up to people wearing masks, or they don't even feel comfortable walking up to an officer wearing a facial covering. So that makes it difficult. But again, with everything that's going on right now, the need for those relationships is even greater. And although some of the different things because of COVID makes it harder to have in-person meetings, again, goes back to technology. It's something that we need to do. It's something that we have continued to do. We still hold our community meetings. We've still been holding our problem-solving meetings. In fact, I attend a lot of meetings from my desk, calling in on different things. And so it's difficult, but again, much needed right now. And so as I tell people, reach out to law enforcement, even if it's just the simple of, hey, we support you, thank you for what you do. But it needs to go farther than that. It's how do we work together to combat everything that's going on right now in all of our communities, not just in San Diego, but nationwide.
And have you guys seen a trend at all in houses of worship being affected anyway during the closure? And has some of the smaller houses of worship able to start reopening, such as vandalism or theft or protests specific to places of worship?
We have not seen that. I know there was a lot of churches that have been fighting to open up sooner and sooner, and I clearly understand why. A lot of people need that avenue to express anxiety and different things like that, and obviously churches are essential in a lot of people's lives, so I think that's very important. But, going back to, we did not see any, really the hate crimes really go up. There was some concern because of the origin of the virus, that there would be some hate towards that particular group or that particular region. But we haven't seen that here really in San Diego.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
And earlier you mentioned reports of child abuse and domestic violence. Right here, we tend to be fairly heavy reporters of at least the child abuse calls because we're mandated reporters.
Yes.
Okay, the organizations you're speaking to today are more than likely all mandated reporters, depending on what state they're in. That being a given, people aren't coming to church. So people would come here and share their knowledge of child abuse that's going on, and we're obligated to report it just based on that. Even if we overhear that conversation, right, we're required to report it. So could you discuss how that's normally done? And you mentioned earlier that it was down, and maybe how a place of worship can help with that. I mean, we have contact with a light amount of contact with our attendees still. So do you have any advice on how we can help with ensuring that the cases continue to get reported? Because that's very important.
Yeah, as I've previously mentioned, we have seen that go down a little bit because generally where we get this is from the mandated reporters, those, in the churches, in the schools, in the medical field. And because you're not being seen in person as much, that avenue for someone to either be discovered or that avenue for someone to disclose that they're being abused, whether it be a child or, on the domestic violence side, But I know a lot of churches are still reaching out to their congregations either via Zoom or from phone calls. I mean, I know, for instance, for us, we still do a lot of work with the elderly with the You Are Not Alone checks. We generally do those in person, but now they've gone to being on the phone. And so there's still those avenues that we can still reach out and talk to people. And just a general question, hey, are you okay? Is there anything that you need to talk about? Might open the door to have somebody freely say, hey, you know, I'm being abused, or I'm aware of a young man or woman that's being abused, or a young kid that's being abused. And then that opens up that door for the mandated reporting, and that allows us to go out and investigate it, because we're still very concerned that that is going on and is not being found out right now.
And I would recommend to you guys watching that if you're not sure if you're a mandated reporter or not, that you find out, because it's a serious thing, and we have to look after the kids. So, Chief, here in San Diego, I don't know if it's statewide or a city thing, and I'd ask you to speak to this, but as your men and women have to arrest people during this time, my understanding, I probably get the term wrong here, but my understanding is there's been a no bail policy going on. That being said, how can you assure how can departments ensure the public that the right people are being held in these times, because there's a lot of people being released? And just to give you an example, we had a vandalism happen at one of our campuses, and a truck was vandalized and a window was broken out. The person was arrested. Then the next day or 2 days later, it happened again by the same person, right, captured on video. So that's unusual, would you say, that person would be released to do the same thing again?
Well, for vandalism, generally, they're not going to be held for very long, but the system or the process that you're talking about is zero bail. And that was created by the Judicial Council of the state. And so really the only thing that we could really book somebody in is violent crime. And so as we kind of went through this, we started seeing, for better terms, repeat offenders. For instance, we had somebody in early May, 3 days in a row, steal a car, get caught 3 days in a row, and there was nothing that we could do about it. And so during this, working with the district attorney's office and ourselves and other law enforcement agencies up and down the state, we were able to get a mechanism where we could petition the courts to hold people that we believed would continue down that path of committing crime, especially violent crime against persons. So it's zero bail still in effect right now. Just reading something within the last two days, looks like that's going to be coming to an end pretty soon, which will allow law enforcement to use actually booking somebody into jail as a mechanism to prevent further crimes down the road.
And did you hear about any concern from the public, from the community, about people being charged and released? I get what you said about violent crime. So if someone was arrested for domestic violence, let's say, or should the community be concerned, or did they express any concerns?
They did. I mean, we heard a lot about it. Domestic violence was one of those crimes that we could book into jail. It was considered a violent crime. Even the misdemeanor domestic violence was considered a bookable offense. But there was a lot of crimes that weren't. For instance, people with convicted felons with firearms was nothing that we could do other than give them a ticket, just like they had run a stop sign. So, again, petitioning the courts to make certain that we had that balance between public safety, but also balancing the health needs of COVID and making certain that we don't get exposures into the jail system that would run rampant. So it was that fine balance. I think we did a pretty good job, but really the game changer for us was the ability to petition the courts and talk to a judge about allowing us to actually book certain individuals into jail for crimes.
I think people watching should know and should understand, hopefully you got a little context at this point, but law enforcement's a tough job to have, especially in these times, and we want to encourage you. I'm going to ask them a question now about building community partnerships, and here's where I'd like to put a little emphasis on the viewers to maybe take action in this way. So, Chief, is it related to that, building partnerships? Here at the Rock Church, we like to feel we partner with our local police, not just San Diego police, but some smaller agencies in the area as well. For example, we do we have a break room at one of our locations for your men and women. We've been allowed to bring a grill or cook burgers at local, at some of the different divisions. We offer our facilities for training for some of your specialized units.
Yes.
You're a longtime SWAT guy, and
Yes.
so we've been talking off and on to your SWAT team about training in our building here. Your K9s are here a lot. I'm running down this list not to say what we do, but just to give people listening an idea of what they can do.
Right.
So if someone wanted to enter into a community partnership, if a house of worship wanted to do that, what are some action steps they could take to initiate that conversation with their local agency?
It's actually a pretty simple process. It's just much like the Rock Church has done. Someone reaches out to either the chief's office or the commanding officer of that respected division, much like you did when I was a commanding officer over at Mid-City Division. And it's that simple. It's just starting that process and, saying, hey, we want to have a relationship. We think we can be helpful in all these different areas. And then it's just about us getting the permission from our respective bosses and then just putting it into process.
I think that's a great point. So if a house of worship wanted to do that, if they walk into a local agency and they didn't get an immediate response, would you recommend they be frustrated by that?
I would be, personally, I would be frustrated by that because I've been the benefactor of, specifically this church, reaching out at multiple levels, both when I was a commanding officer at a patrol command, but also now as the chief and as the patrol chief, of really reaching out. And you folks have done a lot of great things from us, just like you said, of providing meals to rehabbing our own break rooms in our facilities to just the whole relationship on addressing community concerns and having that voice. And so for us, for law enforcement, it's been so beneficial to have you folks as partners. As I can pick up the phone and call Pastor Miles at 2 o'clock in the morning, I really believe he'll answer. And I hope he doesn't call me at 2 o'clock in the morning, but that's okay. But so it's just amazing, the relationships with our faith-based groups. I have so many different meetings with faith-based groups because they truly are beneficial, and also that we're members of their congregation. We're members of the community that they serve, and so all of us working together only makes for a stronger community.
That's great. Maybe speak a little bit too, if you could, Chief, about if someone walked into their local department and just that they need to understand is maybe a process involved to the way that they're saying they would like to partner with their agency. That there may not be an immediate answer available because there's sometimes a chain of command that has to be followed.
All law enforcement agencies kind of have a paramilitary type of structure. So clearly they always have a chief, and then the chief's always going to either report to either the mayor or a city manager. And so sometimes you're not going to get that immediate, I want to do this. In most cases, you should either get the chief or the commanding officer say, absolutely, we want to do this with you. Give me a day or two to reach out to make certain that, I'm not violating any of the city charter rules, because some of the city charter rules can get a little sketchy there, but it really should be nothing more than a couple of days. I guess it all depends on the depth of the project, too. If you're talking about wanting to improve facilities, obviously that's going to be more different than doing some kind of community meeting or doing some kind of something out in the community.
And some people listening may have heard that we do have we call it a break room for police at one of our campuses. If that's something that you have space to do and you want to do, I highly encourage that. It's great. It's a great way to partner and walk with our men and women in blue in your own community. But what I will say is there's a process involved to that. So it's fine. It's not a very long process, but it's not as simple as saying you're going to do it and then setting it up. So just be patient and hang in there with it. Chief, is there any ways that these houses of worship listening can walk with their department other than what we mentioned that the Rock is doing? Are there any other ways that they can serve their local agency?
One thing that for me, it seems very easy, but something that's very neat is being that voice, being the voice of calm, but also kind of helping open up that two-way dialogue between law enforcement. It's unfortunate, but it is a real truth that there are folks that are afraid to reach out to local law enforcement They might have a concern. It could be something as simple. They have a house selling narcotics in their neighborhood. It might be something more egregious than that, but there's a reluctance to reach out to law enforcement. And so if you could kind of be that middle person to kind of help open up that dialogue, that's what's most needed right now, whether it be COVID-19 or what's going on in the world right now. It's just that open dialogue and that calming voice and allowing each other to, one, see each other as people, understanding that we all have the similar goals, but having that ability to have structured dialogue to make positive change.
And can you think of a way that the houses of worship can work together to maybe bridge a gap between the community in general and the police departments? So how can churches or places of worship be a catalyst for that relationship?
Yeah, it just goes back to that relationship. It's just opening up those conversations and tackling tough issues. There's a lot of tough community issues right now around race, around immigration, around poverty, and having all those conversations is needed. It just needs to have what I would say two-way communication, and that to me is the pivotal point, is that two-way communication of really opening up that dialogue, and that's the relationship building that you folks have. You also know who both the formal and informal community leaders are within those specific communities that we can get on board to help us. And then introducing us all in one area, best would be to sit down in one room and start talking things through.
And we hear about things, say different names in different areas of the country, but citizen review boards, community
Yes.
courts, there's probably multiple things like that. There may be some opportunity there for houses of worship to get involved in, or to help bridge that gap with the community at large, to fill some of those seats. Is that something that?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of explain for our department. We're a big department. We're the 8th largest department in the nation, 8th largest city in the nation. So I have a Chiefs Advisory Board. There's also a Citizens Advisory Board over police that reports to the mayor's office. And then currently right now there's a Citizens Review Board. On the ballot in November will be an independent review board to look at police conduct. So anytime there is a complaint against an officer, whether it be a courtesy complaint or a use of force complaint, they'll also have the ability to review all officer-involved shootings, in-custody deaths. So that's the Civilian Review Board. Most likely will become the Independent Review Board. So obviously all those areas have seats. We need people to come on and really help drive the narrative and do review and all these things and bring great suggestions on how we're going to move policing in this city, but all cities, to make improvements.
And that's really important, I would think, to have that level of involvement from the community.
Yes, absolutely.
So if they wanted to do that, is there a certain department they should reach out to, department within their department? You should ask for the Office of Community Relations or Community Policing?
Yeah, so for instance, on the Citizens Advisory Board for police, that you would reach out to the mayor's office. For the Citizens Review Board, you reach out to your council. So if you live in District 5, you would reach out to the council person for District 5 and express your interest there, or contact somebody currently on the Civilian Review Board and ask how they went through the process.
Great. Thanks for that information.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's, if you're watching and listening to this, you may want to reach out and try to become part of the solution, we'll call it, right? Is there a way that houses of worship can bridge a gap to ensure that mandated reporting happens? I mean, it's kind of a repeat of an earlier question, but I don't know that we hit it in that way.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like you mentioned earlier, is if you don't know if you're a mandated reporter, that means we need to do more education on what makes you a mandated reporter. So I think just talking about it all the time and what is it, what are the mandates of being a mandated reporter, what must you report, and who do you report it through? Because I know there's a lot of confusions. I know that comes up in the educational system a lot as teachers and school counselors. Are they mandated reporters? Short answer is they absolutely are, but then what is the avenue for them to report through? I think that's where confusion gets. So the more education we can get on mandated reporting, why is it, what must you do, and basically how do you fulfill your obligations if something is disclosed to you that you believe must be disclosed.
And what would you say to houses of worship as to why it's important to understand that there are mandated reporters, more than likely, and why it's so important to actually take the action step to make the report?
You could be changing somebody's life. I mean, it could be that serious. I mean, especially if you're talking about a young child or, a domestic violence, you could be saving somebody's life. And so I would always say if, really rely on your senses. If something just doesn't seem right, that means you need to report it. That means you need to notify somebody because you could be saving that person's life.
That's right, and very few are reported anyway. So
Right.
it's much more helpful to report it than not. And is there any harm with someone reporting it? Let's say I hear of an allegation here at the Rock, and I make a phone call and report it, and it turns out to be not a false report, but it turns out to be an unfounded report.
Right.
As a reporter, am I in any position of liability for making a report that wasn't founded?
Not whatsoever. So it really gives us the ability to do two things. One, to go out and investigate to see if something is occurring. If something is not occurring, but there's still that concern, it also still gives us or affords us that opportunity to provide a lot of resources to that family unit that could really change their life also. And so, the San Diego Police Department, this city, this county has so many resources for people that are experiencing difficulties, whether it be financial, for home, or for whatever. So even if the allegation might be unfounded, there's still a strong likelihood that we could still provide assistance that would really help somebody out.
Great. And what would you say to someone that house of worship that was kind of hedging on making the actual report because they were concerned about some type of retribution or hard feelings or ruining a friendship over it?
Again, it goes back to, if it's making you think twice about it, I would say report it because you could be really changing somebody's life. And I think anybody who understood that, and I had to do it one time for a friend, very difficult position. I'm still friends with that person. It gives you an opportunity to talk things through and say, hey, here was my concerns, and they're going to understand. If your heart's in the right place and if you're reporting it, your heart's in the right place, you have a general concern about somebody, it's hard to find fault in that.
I would definitely agree. And let's do the reverse of that now. Am I liable if someone reports it to me unofficially here, say I'm at church and someone tells me about a case they know about of child abuse or suspected child abuse or neglect, and I choose not to report it? Am I liable at all?
You could be held liable.
Or our organization?
Your organization, because if you fit in that criteria of it being a mandated reporter, the word mandate means you have to. It's not, you don't have the option. And so that's why, one, it's also very important to realize that you are a mandated reporter and what those criteria means to you, because if it is proven that you had this information and did not disclose it, there could be some repercussions on you as an individual.
That's for sure. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So once again, if you're listening, you probably are a mandated reporter. Used to be an old saying that said, when in doubt, write it out. Means make the report. So make the report. Chief, is there any ways that we can come alongside of all first responders? When I say we, I mean places of worship. We talked about some partnership things, but can you think of any other ways we can walk with our local agency in an effort just be a help or a blessing?
Well, two. Self-serving, the first, is recruiting. For all first responders, I'll speak for the police department, but I know the fire department, lifeguards always are looking for great people to join our ranks. So for that reason, you can be great recruiters for public safety. And when I say public safety, I'm really talking about anybody from a medic to a lifeguard to a firefighter to a police officer. We're always in need of good officers and good public safety staff. And as we sit right now, I'm about 200 officers short of what I need to be fully staffed. And then the other is just allowing us to be part of the community, allowing us to be part of the congregations, goes hand in hand with stronger community units. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is drive down crime, make all of our communities better, make us stronger as one unit, one family, and I really think that's what the houses of worship allow us to do.
That's a good point. Recruit, 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 right?
Yes, absolutely.
Drive people to apply.
Yeah.
So if a place of worship wanted to help and they feel like they weren't ready, like sometimes we say we want to start working out, but I'm not ready. Like you're a big fitness guy, right?
Yes.
All the triathlons and things you do. But to get ready for that, you have to do something, right? I'm not a triathlete, obviously, or a marathoner, but if I wanted to be, I would have to mentally prepare and physically prepare for that run, that competition.
Right.
Would you say that applies to houses of worship that want to come alongside of their police? Should they prepare to do anything first, or should they jump into the deep end?
Yeah, I think each house of worship needs to look at themselves individually and see their capabilities and how far, when are they ready. But simple as they could, jump in the water by just letters of support, words of encouragement, have their congregation write letters to the officers. That would be a simple way. That shows a lot of great support. Inviting some officers to join them for a service is another great way. I've had the ability to come here, different things like that. So it really depends on how ready that house of worship is. They can jump all the way in, or they can just, do the very basic entry-level stuff, but all of it helps. All of it lends to better communities, better relationships, and that's really what we're looking for.
And Chief, right now you're talking to likely hundreds of different places of worship at least around the United States, maybe outside of that even. Is there anything you would like to say to them that we haven't covered today? Like if they were sitting right here in front of us and you were speaking to them, is there a question you would have them be introspective about? Or is there a challenge you would offer them? Is there something you would say?
I really wouldn't say a challenge. I would say first and foremost, thank you for the support. Our houses of worship throughout this city, and I guarantee it's no different across this nation, have been huge supporters of us during difficult times. Obviously, we've had some officers die in the line of duty. This church and other churches have been phenomenal, reaching out and providing that healing support that's much needed when things happen that are very difficult, whether it be, child being killed or different things like that, always reaching out to us. But again, that unwavering support when things are going great, and that unwavering support when things are not going so great right now, that's when we need the support of our houses of worship to know that we're not standing alone. The biggest thing that I fight with our rank and file is the separation of us versus them, and making certain that officers understand that they're part of the community, they're one in the community, and this type of support from our houses of worship really brings us back full circle and puts us back to that kind of the eye on the prize, if you would, of understanding it's not us against them, we're all the same, we're all striving for the same thing, and that support is very critical, especially right now.
Yeah, support is always critical. And if you see a law enforcement person or a firefighter or any first responder or nurse, doctor, say thank you to them, especially during these times. It's not often that they hear kind words. They a lot of times come with unfair expectations, but just say hello and thank you and move on. That means a lot to guys and girls out there working sometimes.
Means more than you'll ever know.
So as we begin to wind down, I want to issue a challenge to people watching, and the challenge would be for everyone listening to reach out. My encouragement would be jump in the deep end. Reach out and partner with agencies in your community, and not just the police, other agencies, but take the first step. You have to do something, and the worst thing you can do is nothing, as we like to say. I'd like to ask the Chief, just how can we be praying for, we being not just the Rock, but we being everyone watching today, how can we be praying for our police and first responders specifically, given the times we're in, which are very difficult times for many reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this 32 years, and I've never seen, 2020 has been a very difficult year with COVID and everything that's going on right now. So to me, it's really, again, it just goes to that support. What you can do is, it's difficult, and pray for wisdom. Pray for law enforcement to have the knowledge of making the right changes, the positive changes. Pray for the collaboration and cooperation of our communities all coming together with law enforcement to make those changes that are needed, but make the right changes to make certain that there's the right balance. And, to me, every night when I go to sleep, I ask God for a couple things, and that's give me the wisdom, give me the knowledge, and give me the courage to do what I need to do to move my department forward in the right direction that's going to give us the ability to serve our community in the very best ability, but also make certain that we're providing that layer of protection to our community, because San Diego is either number one or number two safest city in the nation. And so that's important to us. That's not just a motto, that's very important to us. But we need the wisdom, the knowledge, and the courage to go out and make those changes and address those issues, but also the courage to go out and address violent crime and those that commit those crimes, and allow us to feel comfortable going into harm's way, whether because of COVID or because of what's going on, to put ourselves in harm's way to make certain that we provide that layer of protection to the community.
Amen. And we will be praying in that direction. I encourage people watching to do the same. Do you have any challenges in a good way, any challenges for our audience? I think I mentioned it earlier. But would you want to encourage, let's say, people watching to take any action steps beginning today or Monday or whatever?
Yeah, well, my action steps or my challenges would be get involved. There's a lot of different ways you can get involved with your community. There's a lot of different, problem-solving meetings in the community, neighborhood watch, join your next door to find out what's going on in your community. As we were talking about, there's different opportunities for you to get to volunteer with law enforcement, whether it be on an advisory board, the chief's advisory board, the mayor's advisory board, civilian review board, or independent review boards. Those are all great opportunities, but I also challenge you to go out and meet at least 5 officers or first responders. Go out, introduce yourself, and maybe just spend 5 minutes asking them about their life story, where they came from, did they grow up in this city, how they got to San Diego. We get a lot of folks that came out here from the military that join our ranks. I think I'm one of the few native San Diegans that I ever talk to. So kind of just, I challenge you to go out and meet 5 first responders and just hear their story and why that person became a first responder.
That would be awesome. Except when the chief get mad because now they're standing around and not doing their job. I don't know.
No, that to me is, I always tell the officers to spend time out of their car in what I would call a non-enforcement mode, to just introduce themselves, to walk into the store and ask to talk to the owner and say, hey, I'm Officer Allen and this is my beat. And, if you ever need anything, here's how to get a hold of me. So that to me is time well spent.
And would you encourage the same at houses of worship? Would you encourage them as they meet officers in that area or firemen in that area to invite them in for coffee or water or church service or whatever?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. You guys hear that? It's time to get to it. Thank you for watching. Chief, if you have any final comments?
No, I just want to thank you for the partnership, for the support, and for inviting me here today.
I want to say we really appreciate you for coming out today, and very grateful for that. I know you have a busy schedule, and you made time to come and talk to all these places of worship around the country. So we deeply appreciate that, and we appreciate what you and your team, your department, does for us in our area. Thanks for keeping us safe.
Thank you.